I'm not the type of guy to believe in conspiracy theories or wild tales. I've spent my entire life relying on facts, on what's real and tangible. I'm 33 now, a Navy SEAL for over a decade. I've been in more high-stakes situations than I care to remember, and I've seen things that would make most men break. But there's something I've been holding on to, something that's been eating at me every day since it happened. I killed 50 of them. It wasn't in Afghanistan, Iraq, or some classified op in the Middle East. No, this took place somewhere much closer to home, and the truth is, our own government has been keeping it under wraps. You've heard the rumors about creatures living in the deep, about how the ocean is still largely unexplored. Well, let me tell you, those rumors don't even scratch the surface. I was part of a covert operation off the coast of Alaska. Officially, we were testing underwater drones in one of the most remote regions on the planet, but unofficially, we were there because something had been detected. Something big. The local fishermen had been reporting strange disappearances for years. Boats would vanish, entire crews gone. No sign of struggle, no wreckage, just gone. But it wasn't until a marine biologist stumbled across a mangled body washed up on the shore that the military got involved. It wasn't human, or at least not entirely. The thing had limbs, eyes, and a mouth, but they were wrong. Elongated fingers ending in claws, skin covered in a translucent film, like something out of a nightmare. Its face was a contorted mix of human and animal features, with eyes that looked far too intelligent for something that wasn't supposed to exist. The autopsy revealed something even worse. It wasn't just one of them. They were a species, and they were multiplying. Our mission was simple. Go in, contain the threat, and eliminate it. We were a team of 6, all of us seasoned SEALs, all of us trained to handle the unthinkable. But nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered down there. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. We found the first one in a cave system about 400 meters below the surface. It moved faster than anything I'd ever seen underwater, darting between rocks like it had been born there, which, looking back now, it probably had. We managed to kill it, but not before it let out this deafening, high-pitched scream, a sound that reverberated through the water in our bodies like it was calling out to the others. And that's when we realized they weren't just creatures. They were hunters, predators. The next few hours were hell. They came at us in waves, dozens of them, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. They had claws that could tear through Kevlar like it was paper, teeth sharp enough to snap bone. But the worst part wasn't their strength or speed. It was the intelligence behind their attacks. They worked together, flanking us, forcing us into traps. One of my brothers didn't even see it coming. One second he was there, the next he was dragged into the darkness, screaming, and then silence. We fought for our lives in that black abyss, with nothing but the dim lights of our dive suits and the cold steel of our weapons. For every one we killed, it felt like 2 more took its place. The ocean around us was turning red with their blood, and ours. By the time we surfaced, I was the only one left. My team was gone, dragged into the depths, torn apart by these things that weren't supposed to exist. I'd killed 50 of them by the end, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not when I knew how many more were still out there. When I was debriefed, I told them everything, but they buried it, classified it, said it never happened. And I know why. Because if the world knew, if people really understood what was living down there, no one would ever go near the ocean again. I've been quiet for too long. I can't keep this to myself anymore. These creatures are real. They're still out there lurking in the deep, waiting for their moment. And trust me, they won't stay hidden forever. They're evolving. They're coming. And we're not ready for them. I was recruited for the project in August 2018. I just completed my 20th year in the military, 15th in Special Forces, and for the first time was considering leaving. Lost friends along the way, and the last of my family had just passed. Felt like it was time. I never hid how I was feeling, and I think people understood. August 12, 2018. I received a message from my group commander telling me to be ready for a private video call at 13. No further info. This in itself was unusual, and the identity of the caller made it more so. Not every day you hear from a retired Rear Admiral and former head of NSWC. It was a short conversation. Best of my recollection, it went as follows. I've changed all the names below for obvious reason. Admiral, sir. Matthew, been a long time. Condolences on your recent loss. How are you holding up? Well, as can be expected, sir. Good to hear that. Nah, time is a factor here, so let's get straight to it. I've heard you may be leaving us, and in your position, I can't blame you. A lot of lucrative offers out there for a man of your talents. I believe I may have one that will suit you. To be honest, I didn't know what to say to this. In my experience, this wasn't how things were done, he continued. I was contacted this morning by someone I respect, former ODNI, to ask if I had a suitable candidate for a team he is heading. To be clear, this is an SAP, with a blank check run in conjunction with some of our private contractors and assets. You are the obvious choice. No family, I thought, halfway out the door already. If you're interested, I'll pass you through to another call with the project leads. Give these men your consideration, son. This is a unique opportunity to serve your country and be well rewarded. Can't deny I was intrigued. As much as I'd been toying with the prospect of civilian life, it wasn't a comfortable feeling. I'll admit it scared me a little. The fear of being without purpose. At least that's how I imagined it at the time. Yes or no, Matthew? Yes, sir. Wise decision. In that case, my involvement ends and this discussion never took place. Understood? Understood, sir. He nodded to me and the screen went blank. My connection was routed to a platform I didn't recognize. In the following minutes, I received download requests for some heavy-duty encryption and security software. Once they completed, a fresh call screen opened. There were 2 others present, but no video or ID. Their audio carried a mild distortion, likely some form of voice masking. The conversation only lasted 2 minutes. They gave me a brief overview of the project and what would be required of me, dates and times. Officially, we would be employed by a private entity as there could be no paper trail, no traceable association to any branch of government, plausible deniability in case of a catastrophic intelligence leak. The pay was more than adequate, and my immediate discharge would be facilitated. What wasn't discussed were any details of the operation. They simply told me I'd be briefed on site. The call ended and one of those new security programs kicked in, cleaning itself and any trace of the last 15 minutes from my system. That was how it began for me. I worked within this section's purview for the next 4 years till I accepted the truth. We all know there are crimes committed in the name of our country, all manner of evils concealed by those in power. And my own silence was a part of that. As long as I kept their secrets, I was as guilty as they were. So I decided to tell my story. I've lost everything because of that choice. But I won't stop. I'll post the truth wherever I can until they find me. There's an old quote which stuck with me through the years, spoken 9 centuries ago by the King of Jerusalem. I think of it near every night, words rising up in the quiet moments, as I drive through the night, watching my mirror for a tale, as I give another false name at another cheap motel, as I sleep alone in the woods, gun in my hand. I find myself whispering it, a prayer and a mantra and a curse. When you stand before God, you cannot say, but I was told by others to do thus, or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice. Indeed, it will not. So here we are. If you're hoping for scientific and technag detail on what I saw, sorry, but I'm not that guy. I'm no peachy, and all relevant intelligence was on a need-to-know basis. Compartmentalization is key to security. There are thousands of people all over the U.S. who have worked on beyond top-secret projects and never had any idea what they were a part of. In the most basic scenario, think of it like this. You need someone to drive a truck. Doesn't mean they need to know what's in it. Even the information I did learn of the project and its history were limited. I received some general scene setting and early briefings and picked up the rest over time. To the best of my knowledge, the site was discovered through irregularities on standard seismic scans. Some bright spark matched the coordinates with recorded satellite interference, then took a field trip to check it out. What they discovered worked its way up the ladder until someone senior enough made the decision to lock it down and bury everyone involved in this. The land surrounding the anomaly was bought up through private third parties, and a mining concern created as cover. August 15th, I took a flight out of San Diego, arriving for pickup around 3 hours later. After 2 decades of traveling overseas, this was a genuine pleasure. I was collected by another ex-Special Forces operative. Let's call him Mark. We drove 8 hours from city to suburb to empty plain, arriving in the mountains after dark. Mark wasn't much of a talker, but neither was I, so we got along just fine. After an hour of winding through moonlit forest, we reached our destination at 2 a.m. Mark had a key code for the first gate, a vehicle-sized entrance and high-perimeter fence. The road took us to a complex of buildings nestled on the mountainside. We were met there by 2 armed guards who escorted us from then on. They led us inside one of the larger structures and pointed out where our living quarters were located, then took us down a narrow set of stairs to a cold and empty basement. There were steel double doors built into the wall, maybe 20 feet wide, which accessed the interior of the mountain itself. We entered what had once been a natural cave network, now enlarged and extended through the recent excavation. A single powerful lead strip ran down the center of the ceiling, and there were cameras at every corner. It was a 5-minute walk through those stone passages before we reached the final checkpoint. This door was airtight, 6-inch thick steel, and must have weighed the better part of a ton. On the other side was the project control center. It was a relatively basic setup. One equipment tower with computer stations on either side, a generator, and several stacks of containers. On the opposite side of this area, I saw a second airtight steel door. There were only 3 people present. First was a tall, thin male in his 50s who introduced himself as Adam, the on-site lead, and I suspected one of the men I had spoken to by video call. Next was Joanna, an intelligence analyst, and Agency liaison. Last was Luke, who would be part of the security detail with Mark and myself. There were never many people present. In fact, I rarely saw more than half a dozen at any one time. The remaining 3 members of the team arrived in the next hour, and our initial briefing took place shortly after. Adam called everyone together, and we introduced ourselves. I'd be leading the security team, and when there were no comms with base, assume overall command. Mark and Luke completed my squad. John, a gray-haired physicist, would lead the science team. Peter was a geologist and the youngest of the group at 36. Eve was the third, a biologist with a deep South accent. Regards the team's numbers, in particular the 3-and-3 split, that was a concern. As far as I had been led to believe, this was primarily a military operation. I had no idea what we would be facing, so didn't want civilians on the first trip down. I was overruled. Adam never said it aloud, but we were clearly under serious time pressure. I didn't discover why until several years later. The next morning, Joanna took us through to see the object which had brought us all there. The anomaly, she called it. Not going to lie, it wasn't much to look at, not at first. It occupied the center of another excavated room surrounded by an array of monitoring equipment. From a distance, I thought it was just a hole in the floor, nothing more than a tunnel with oddly colored sides. But on approach, I realized it was actually separate from the rock, a pale tube 15 feet in diameter, rigidly extending a few inches out from the stone encasing it. The material which formed it possessed a faint luminescence, a milky light which swelled or shrank in each passing moment. Despite this, when I stared down inside, I found the interior plunged rapidly into total darkness. At the mouth, there was also a mild disturbance in the air, tiny waves of heat and humidity, which buffeted my skin. The surface of the tunnel wall appeared to be in constant motion, reflecting and distorting any light which fell on it. The on-site team referred to this structure as biofilm, though they never successfully acquired a sample to confirm its nature. It was only 2 inches at its thickest point, yet penetrating it in any way had proven impossible. Nothing was able to pierce the surface. Pneumatic drills, graphene blades, and even an infrared solid-state laser all failed. Force or radiation of any kind was almost instantly dissipated throughout the biofilm. The only measurable effect of any of these tests was a temporary increase in luminescence. As for the interior, they tried sending drones down in early July. Both units were lost to electromagnetic interference in the first 50 feet, dropping lifeless into the dark like pennies in a well. To be fair to the team involved, there was no messing around on the third attempt. They lowered a heavily reinforced and insulated instrument platform on steel wire cabling, the kind of unit that could survive a volcano or the ocean floor, that worked better until they ran out of cable at 2 miles. Next attempt reached 7 miles. The readings these units returned were unusual to say the least. Inside the tunnel there were no variation in temperature, humidity, or atmospheric pressure, none whatsoever. 32.3 degrees Celsius and humid as a rainforest every inch of the way, down to 7 miles. Now, just for comparison, the land outside the caves averaged 12 degrees that month and dust dry. The air inside the tunnel was also tested for airborne toxins and other trace materials. This result was even stranger. There was nothing detected, not so much as a microbe. It was as if the atmosphere inside remained completely sterilized despite being open to the air. August 10th, the sensor platform was lowered for a 3rd time. This attempt halted at 9 miles. They had found something. We had set our descent for August 17th at 8. A lift had been constructed the previous day after a final delivery of equipment. It looked reassuringly sturdy and had a max carry weight of 20,000 pounds, so we would be well within safety parameters. The miles of cable had been arriving for days and were laid out everywhere you looked. Our gear was all excellent quality. 3rd-generation night vision, pop respirators, though there was no indication yet we would require them, custom-made Kevlar composite body armor, standard Glock 19 sidearms, and modified MiG-17 scars for the security detail. Not everyone's favorite weapon, but I never had an issue. We also used an interlinked video comm system, where everything we saw and heard was recorded and could be viewed in real time or replayed by any other member. This system also included location trackers built into our helmets. If I was going to be petty, which I am, the chest rig had a stupid design and the pockets weren't big enough, but no serious complaints. The lift had 2 sections. At the base was a detachable cargo area, which we had packed with floodlights and generators. Above was the main carriage, which would hold ourselves and all other equipment and supplies. A big part of that weight was devoted to fluids in expectation of high temperature and humidity. Mark, Luke, and myself had been through hotter with heavier gear, but the 3 civilians were likely to struggle. The 6 of us entered the lift at 7:55 for final checks. I received the go-ahead on schedule, locked the gate in place, and we began our descent. The bioluminescence faded, and our own harsher lights took over. Eve and Peter were visibly nervous, fidgeting and whispering to each other. I remember looking up and watching the circle of light above shrink as we left the surface behind. The lift descended at 15 miles per hour, which gave an estimated travel time of 45 minutes with regular stops. Comm links to base were useless by the 2-mile point and never improved. Our direct links between each other remained viable with only minor interference. Adam had warned us to expect headaches, fatigue, and sudden rises in body temp due to the electromagnetic radiation, and though we all felt those effects to varying degrees, it was never as severe as originally feared. If I recall correctly, we made our stops every 2 miles. John would check the atmospheric stats each time before we proceeded. Eve made fresh attempts to take samples of the biofilm without success. Little could be seen through the tunnel walls, but our geologist remained enthused. He told me something about basalt and water-bearing minerals, which I'm sure would have been fascinating if I understood it. We reached 6 miles at 34 minutes. The only sound was the movement of the lift cables and our own breathing. The only light our flickering lamps. When we passed 7.7 miles, John asked for our attention. We are now deeper than humans have ever even drilled. At this depth, we would expect temperatures of 180 Celsius, 356 Fahrenheit. He held up his thermometer reading and smiled. But it's still 30, 2.3, 0 variation. Extraordinary. We continued down, steadily and without incident. Mark and Luke were quiet and professional as expected. The 3 members of the science team handled the conditions better than I could have hoped. At 43 minutes, I called for everyone to put on their breathing apparatus as planned. We had air quality monitored in the shaft, but beyond that was a mystery. No one spoke as those final seconds came and went. We arrived on schedule, the tunnel walls vanishing on all sides as we descended into an immense and silent darkness. I slowed the lift to a halt and peered over the edge with my torch on full. The last probe's data indicated a solid surface, and that appeared to be accurate. I dropped down onto striated rock covered by biofilm, no different to the walls of the tunnel we had just left. In fact, the biofilm extended unbroken in every direction, suggesting we were simply in a swelling of the tunnel as opposed to an entirely new area. It was, and I cannot stress this enough, the deepest pitch black I've ever experienced. As powerful as they were, our torches illuminated such narrow bands that they felt almost useless. I've no doubt the silence played a part in this impression. There was no sound but that which we made ourselves, not so much as a trickle of water. I imagined I could feel the weight of all those miles above bearing down billions of tons of stone between us and the light. From the faces of the others, I don't think I was the only one. When the 6 of us had exited, we began setup, unpacking the floodlights, generators, and other supplies. I retested our location trackers and local team comm network, flicking through each member's video and audio, and found it working with minimal issues. I tried the Gen 3 night vision, but there was little to see other than an empty expanse, quiet and waiting. The infrared setting was useless due to interference. When the air quality checks were complete, we removed our breathing apparatus. There was still no detectable variation in atmospheric conditions and no sign of toxins or other biohazards. Mark found the remains of the 2 drones that had fallen weeks before and packaged them for return. We had brought a fresh drone, but it could only manage a few seconds of flight before interference killed it. John began work on alternatives, imaging systems that could provide an advanced picture of our surroundings. He called us over 30 minutes later. On his screen, the scanned data fed back, rendering a 3D model of the cavern's interior. We stood in the basin of a huge ovoid, 3 miles long, 2 miles wide, and 1 mile tall, and there was something else in the center of the chamber, beginning just 100 feet above us. "What the F is that?" said Mark. I suspect he spoke for all of us. In the silence over our heads, a gigantic cylinder ran the full length of the expanse. If the imaging was correct, it was almost 2 miles long with a diameter of half a mile. I found myself involuntarily glancing up, though I knew my eyes couldn't penetrate the darkness. "It isn't attached to anything. John tapped the image on his screen. This artifact, above us. It isn't touching the surrounding structure, not anywhere. No visible support. It's just floating, for want of a better word. It only took us a couple of minutes to angle some floodlights directly upwards, then zoom our cameras in on the object. We could see it up there, though there was no great detail for me to describe. All the light revealed was a dull metallic surface, the smooth skin of the sleeping giant hanging over us. All right, I checked the time and decided to push on. Let's get back to it. We've got a schedule to keep. As we worked, I noticed the bioluminescence had picked up around the lift in both surface area and intensity. I didn't know whether to be unnerved or thankful. It took us 2 hours to set up the field of cables and lighting. When we were complete, almost a quarter of the chamber floor had enough illumination for us to find our way without night vision. The lamp still flickered, but we would have to live with it. I'd created and overlaid a location grid on the models John had produced. Once everyone confirmed access to this on our handsets, we agreed to regroup at base camp. The walk back was when Eve fell. I heard her intake of breath and curse on the audio, then Luke helping her up. I switched to her video feed on my own headset. "Eve, you all right? What happened?" "Sorry," she sounded more irritated than hurt, tripped. I watched the live feed as the biologist dusted herself down and began to examine the ground around her feet. It was as flat and featureless as any other part of the biofilm. "I definitely tripped on something sharp," she said. "It was right here." "Luke," I saw him helping her search. "Didn't see anything, sir," he replied. "I'm not imagining it," she continued. "I know what I felt." I rewound her footage and played it back. Eve had been watching where she was going, and I couldn't see a reason for the fall. "Nothing on your cam. Luke didn't see it. Nothing there now. Let's put it down as a stumble and move on." I didn't stumble. I could hear the frustration in her voice and saw on her live feed that she had sat back down. As I watched, she rolled up a trouser leg and focused the visual on her shin. An ugly cut was bleeding just beneath her knee. "Okay, Eve, point made. I'm not doubting you. But for now, there's nothing else we can do. Let's get back to base, patch that up, and stick to our schedule. If there's time, we'll return to this area to investigate. Mark it on your map grid." Hindsight is a wonderful thing. I've heard that or said it myself at just about every post-op debrief I was ever a part of. I could have stopped the mission right there. Pulled everyone back to the lift and got out of there. I could have, but I didn't. We topped up on fluids, then set out on our assigned paths. I led Team 1, myself and Peter, on perimeter recon. Team 2, Mark and John, would go straight down the center of the cavern beneath the artifact. Team 3, Luke and Eve, would remain at base until another squad returned. I estimated my team would take 4 hours with a couple of breaks. Mark and John, 3 hours. As we approached the midway point of the cavern, the floodlights had long faded behind us. The weight of darkness seemed to press in, a vast emptiness swallowing the sound of our steps. I found myself getting jittery, genuinely nervous for the first time in years. Sweat stung my eyes as I checked and rechecked our location. When we stopped to drink, I activated my mech. "Updates. Team 2? "Fourth stop," Mark replied, taking more readings from the artifact. I heard John's voice in the background, then he clicked on his own mic and repeated himself so I could hear. "The electromagnetic interference is from the cylinder. Almost certain of that now. It appears weakest at the midpoint, rising in intensity at either end. Still to confirm that, of course." "All right, Team 3? "No issues." Luke's voice calm and assured. "Completed equipment diagnostics. Good to go when needed." I noted comms quality degrading with distance. It seemed likely we'd lose contact with Luke and Eve by the time we reached the far end of the chamber. My train of thought was broken by Peter's hand on my arm. I turned and saw him pointing ahead. "I see a light," he said. Grid zone 109 maybe, or 110. I peered into the distance where he indicated. There was definite illumination there, a dull red which varied in intensity. I flicked the comms back on. This is Team 1. We may have found something. Going to investigate Grid Zone 109. The glow increased in size and strength as we approached. When we got within 50 feet, it became apparent it was radiating from the biofilm wall, a fluctuating crimson shining through the material of the chamber. It was moving, I realized, flowing slowly on the wall, then across the floor. It's lava. Peter was smiling broadly, his face bathed in red light, fascinated and amused in equal measure. He stepped forward and reached out for the glowing surface, placing his hand against it before I could stop him. "It's cool," he said with a laugh, waving his hand back at me. "No heat transfer at all." That close, we could see the biofilm itself shimmering, whatever substance it was made of, redirecting and distributing the heat and pressure from the molten rock. As we stood and watched the flow surge beneath our feet, quickly growing to many times its original area and brightness, engulfing us both in its luminescence. My God, look at that. I followed Peter's gaze and my breath caught in my throat. The lava cast its light across the chamber, caressing all before it in a sea of dark fire. High above us, the gigantic artifact hung suddenly revealed, still and silent and alien. "This is Team 2, John's voice interrupted us. "We found a discontinuity in the cylinder's surface. It's a narrow circular channel, faint light emanating from it, approximate radius of 40 feet. Purely speculation, but perhaps an entrance of some sort." I tried to reply, but a burst of static left the audio crackling. When I switched to John's vidifeed, it flickered too badly to see anything. "Look," said Peter behind me. "The lava is cooling against the biofilm, fading already. I mean, that was 700 degrees at minimum." Team 1, Matthew," John's voice came through again. "This is Team 1, I replied. "Go ahead." Mark is missing." I turned and he was gone, just seconds ago. I can't see him and he isn't answering on comms. I pulled up the location trackers. Mark's had vanished and his video and audio were dead. "His gun is here," John said. I switched to his vidifeed and saw the physicist pick up the Mach-17. "It's just lying here." "John, listen to me." I pulled up Mark's video history as I spoke. "Do not move. Stay right where you are and await instruction." Mark's video cut out 90 seconds earlier. One frame he was watching John walk ahead of him. Next frame the signal was gone. I ignored my rising heart rate and focused. "John, you read me?" "Yes, I'm here. I hear you." "Stay on comms. Do not leave this line. We will come to you. I have you at Gridmon 101, correct?" Yes, that sounds correct." "Put all your lights on full and stay calm. We're en route." I realized I had already started towards him, and Peter was running behind me to catch up. "Team 1 to Team 3, we may have an issue. Mark is Maya, heading to last known location, double time. Be ready to move if we require assistance." "No problem," Luke's voice, standing by. Seconds later, Mark's locator returned on tracking, but his video and audio remained out. According to the signal, he was only 30 feet from his last known position. "John, I need you to do something for me." "All right. Are you close?" 4 minutes. Look on your personnel tracker. Mark's his back, northwest of you, very close. See it?" "Yes, I see the signal." "Shine your lights in that direction for me." I watched his feed as he turned to the correct heading and aimed his torches. "What's that?" he said, no longer able to hide the tremor in his voice. I zoomed in the picture to be certain. "It's Mark's helmet," I replied, quickening my pace again. "Don't move. 2 minutes." I heard Peter's ragged breathing behind me as he struggled to keep pace. I remember calling back to him that we were almost there. "Matthew," John's voice wavering, I think. His camera went blank and his locator vanished. Marks disappeared with it. I halted, weapon raised. Peter missed my hand signal and almost ran into me, clutching my pack to stop himself falling. "John?" I called over the comms. There was no reply. We were close, but I couldn't see anything ahead or hear anything other than Peter's breathing. "Mark, John. Anyone read me?" Darkness closed in around us once more, invisible arms tightening their grasp. Decisions. I had potentially lost 2 of my team. Regroup or search. With so little idea of what had happened, either could be disastrous. Had Mark cracked under the pressure, wandered off, then returned and taken John? It didn't seem likely. The man was a professional, as experienced as I was. Was it 2 accidents back-to-back which cut off all contact? That seemed even less likely. What did that leave? Hostiles? Team 1 to Team 3. "Luke, we have a problem here. Have you been listening?" "Yes, sir. Every word." "What's your situation?" "I was just about to call you, sir." The comms crackled as he spoke, but I could still make him out. "May have a problem here, too. I'm reading some failed floodlights on Team 2's route, started right at the perimeter and working back toward us at base. 3 down now. Any ideas, sir?" "Nothing to do with us." I checked the system and he was right. All the outages were in a straight line from the furthest edge of lights towards the lift. A 4th flashed out as I watched. I could feel things spiraling out of control. "Luke, I can't risk more people hunting for Mark and John. I've no idea what we're facing here. Returning to you, hold your position." "Yes, sir." We began moving again back to base at the best speed Peter could manage. On the display, I watched the line of floodlights continue to flick out. "Luke," set rep. Lost more lights. Just 2 left on this grid line. Eve said she tried the thermal imaging. I heard her voice in the background, fast and rising, frightened. "Luke, what's going on?" Weapons fire in the distance, 2 bursts from a Mach-17. I froze and stared in the direction of the sound. On my tracker, their signals vanished. I dropped to one knee and scanned every patch of light ahead through my scope. Peter was at my shoulder, gasping for breath. "What the F was that?" he said was... "Quiet," I cut him off. "Luke? Eve? Someone answer me." No reply. There was nothing on any line but static. My heart was racing. I looked at the grid where the floodlights went out. There was a second line of failures forming now, a new path which led away from the lift, towards us. I wavered. Despite all my training and experience, I was afraid, and it was breaking me. I'd faced death before, taken a bullet more than once. But this wasn't the same. I felt as helpless as a child, crushed by a simple primal fear as old as our species itself, the fear of what might wait in the dark. "I don't want to die here," I thought, regripping my weapon. "Do not die here. I will not die here." "Peter, listen to me. Breathe. Put your hand on my shoulder. Do not let go. We are not going to stop again from here to the lift. Put all your lights out. Do not activate comms. We are silent from here on in. Understand?" He began to speak, then nodded instead. Shit, I thought. If I was scared, I couldn't even imagine what he was going through. "Go." I chose a route which swung away from the disabled lights, taking us to the lift in a wide loop. Every few seconds more floodlights cut off on the readout. Their path halted at our previous location, then began again in a scattershot pattern expanding from that point. A search pattern. It became a race, soaked in sweat and shaking with adrenaline, every muscle burning, waiting every second for something to come out of the dark. A minute out, the closest light to our lift failed. I swung us away from it, weapon up, arm shaking, pointing the barrel into the black. Peter was in desperate shape behind me, a stumbling weight hanging on my side. I saw the lift ahead. Every nearby floodlight was down but 2. We were close, maybe 30 seconds. Another light went out, 50 feet behind us. Peter, I was gasping for air myself. Straight inside, 20 seconds. Get moving. I'll cover the door. Only one light remained, 10 seconds out. Peter's hand came off my shoulder and I turned just in time to see him die. It lasted only a fraction of a second. Something grasped him from the shadows, but I couldn't make it out, only the way it held him. It crushed him as if he were trapped under limbs of perfect glass, breaking and tearing his body like paper. He came apart in a dozen pieces before he could even cry out. I stumbled back and fell, blood spraying across the ground and sinking into the biofilm. My weapon hung limp in my hand. I hadn't even fired, wouldn't even know what to shoot at. I scrambled away on all fours, then back to my feet and through the lift gate, finger back on my trigger. Then I was in, one hand working the panel and the other trying to keep my weapon. The lift began to ascend. I left them all behind. I sometimes wonder is guilt why I'm doing this now. I say I'm posting this because it's the right thing, the moral thing, to give people the truth. Am I lying to myself? Is this guilt masquerading as righteousness? How would I know? In the grand scheme of things, do my reasons even matter? All that matters is the truth. People have a right to know what is coming. More than that, they have a right to know what is already here. I set the lift to max ascent speed of 30 miles per hour. It would get me to the surface in 18 minutes. Exhaustion took over. I slid to my knees, pulled off my helmet, and poured water over myself. I was on my knees in the corner, forehead against the cool metal beside the comms panel. Everything detail raced through my mind, over and over. Every mistake and failure and misjudgment. I started getting intermittent comms around 2 miles. I kept trying and finally got through at 1 mile. I can't remember my exact words. I told them I was the only survivor, that I was alone, only minutes away. Most of their replies were lost to static. Then Joanna's voice came through clear, repeating a question. Matthew, main carriage weight reads 900 pounds. If you're alone, what are you bringing up? I remember those moments. Confusion to realization to horror. I knew there was nothing in the cargo hold. It had been sealed when empty. There had been nothing in the carriage either. No, nothing I could see. Matt, can you hear me? I reached for the control panel, typed in the emergency overrides, and detached the cargo hold. I felt the weight go, heard a crash from below as it caught the tunnel wall and spun into the darkness. I switched the screen to lift diagnostics. The carriage weight was still 900. I stopped the ascent, closed my eyes, breathed. It grew quiet as the lift settled. I remember I was still on my knees, one hand on my weapon. I waited, listening. The creak from behind me, the tiniest shifting of weight in the left corner. I spun and opened fire, the sudden roar of my rifle deafening in the enclosed space. Then I was in the air, stunned from a massive impact, then falling, striking the tunnel wall and falling with the lift going past. I should be dead. It was luck that saved me, nothing else. My left leg went through one of the support bars that had held the cargo bay. As I swung back, my flailing hand grasped metal, and I held myself there. My gun was gone, and I couldn't feel my left arm. Then the pain came, waves of blinding pain from my shoulder and across my torso, blood rushing down my chest. I could see it pouring into the dark below me. As I fought to pull myself up, I heard and felt more movement above me. A sudden jerk as weight was lifted, then the scrape of something on the cables, shaking the entire lift back and forth. Whatever had been in there with me was climbing the rest of the way out. Matt, what's going on? We hear weapons fire. Joanna's voice. I realized only a few seconds had passed since I'd opened fire. Matt, Then it cut out for the last time. I heard gunshots from above. Many gunshots and what I think were screams. I don't know how long it took me to get back up. I was faint and in shock from blood loss and trauma. Don't even remember activating the lift. There was a hole clean through the ballistic plate in my body armor and shoulder. My MX-17 was on the floor, crushed like a soda can. The areas above were a disaster, dead bodies and destroyed equipment. Adam and Joanna, what remained of them, were in the control room. The huge airtight steel door had been torn out of the wall and tossed aside like it was made of cardboard. I was the only one left alive, and the thing I had brought to the surface was gone. Out of time. Have to move before they find me. We'll post again if I make it. A few summers ago, me and a few buddies went catfishing at a local reservoir. This is rural Ohio, and the reservoir was off a dirt road about 2 miles from the village it fed, which was a village of about 1,500 people. We had fished this spot tons of times, and we very rarely saw other people during the day, and we never saw anyone out there at night. So the day we went out, it was about 9 p.m. Sun's going down. We had a couple cases of beer. We were planning on staying out until the sun came back up. We didn't want to be bothered. We weren't really allowed to have alcohol around the reservoir anyway. So we actually drove a dirt service road clear around the reservoir, as far away as we could get from the road end. This service road was nothing but compacted dirt with tree roots running across it, areas that had washed away during flooding, fallen trees, and the road that had been there for years, etc. This was not a well-traveled road, and the only way we got around it was that we all had lifted 4x4, trucks or jeeps. The site we pick is out on a piece of land that stretches out into the water a bit in a teardrop kind of shape, goes maybe 20 feet out into the reservoir, so we have water on all sides of us besides our back. We figure we can fish from different directions since we will have 5 or 6 poles in the water. It would give us a little more room to cast without tangling lines. Plus there was remnants of a fire pit and some wood that was already collected. So we get start a fire, bait our poles, and start drinking. We fish for 2 or 3 hours and get good and drunk. In the meantime, a thick summer fog creeps in across the pond. Then we hear a huge sploosh and we see the ripples coming from across the water to our right. There is maybe 50 yards of water between us and the other bank, and the fog was so thick we could not see the bank or what caused the sound, but we could see the ripples in the water once they got to us. We explain it away to a tree limb falling in the water, or maybe a beaver jumping off the bank. Do beavers jump? And we keep fishing. About 20 minutes later, another huge sploosh, and the ripples come again. And let me tell you, there was no mistaking the sound. It was not a fish flopping, and it was not a frog jumping in the water. It was the sound of a large, heavy object, like the sound someone makes when they do a cannonball off the diving board. But we explain it away as we did with the first. Shortly after that, we run out of wood for the fire. So we leave one guy to watch the poles. Me and a few buddies go out into the brush to find fallen sticks and whatnot. We all go our separate ways and meet back at the fire shortly after. One of my buddies comes back to the fire with a white jacket, a pair of rubber boots, and a clown mask in his arms. This was about the time when there were all the posts about the scary clowns who would lurk around towns to scare people. I knew those stories were bullshit, so I figured it was just left over from dumbass kids who had a party out there one night and left it. So we get the fire going again. We fish for a little while longer when we hear twigs breaking in the woods across the water, and then another huge sploosh. At this point, we know there is someone out there with us, and the sound has to be someone dropping something in the water. So we call out, like, hey, if there is someone out there, we aren't making trouble, just fishing and drinking some beers. We'd be happy to have you join us. Dead silence. So we call out again and again, to no response. A couple of my buddies are seriously freaking out at this point between the booze, the clown mask, the fog, and the mystery noises. So I get that drunk courage, you know the kind, and I decide we should all go walk around the bend and see just what the F's going on. this guy's being a hole and trying to scare us. I convinced 2 of my buddies to come with me, and the other 2 guys watched the poles. So we 3 trek into the brush with our flashlights, make our way through the thick-ass fog, start working around this lake. And as we go, we start finding bits of trash and saplings that had been cut down, and then more trash, and then footprints of someone in their bare feet, which is odd since it was so much work to get back to this spot on the lake. No one would be hiking around this far around the lake to fish in this spot. As I'm sweeping the woods with my flashlight, I walk over the crest of a hill, and not 10 feet in front of my face is a tent. This tent had been here for a long time. There was moss growing on the sides of it, and there was trash and shit thrown all around this campsite. Most concerning, though, was the pile of propane tanks. There had to have been 15 or 20 of those 5-gallon propane tanks. So we all looked at each other, and I said, "Welp, I guess this is none of my business." And we hurriedly made our way back to the fire, threw all of our shit in the back of the trucks, and made our way out of there in a hurry. On the way out from around the reservoir, we pull onto the main, still dirt, road and pass a shitty little Toyota Camry with 5 dudes in it. Watching in the rear view, they pull onto the service road we just left out of. So for those that aren't savvy to rural southern Ohio, we busted a meth lab in the middle of the woods. The owner of said meth lab tried to scare us away by throwing shit in the lake. I can only assume that when throwing shit in the lake didn't scare us away, the meth cook called some of his buddies to scare us out. Or worse yet, the meth cook called his buddies after we saw his operation. In which case, I'm glad we got out of there before they showed up. I was camping with my girlfriend at the time and her sister and sister's boyfriend. We made steak and beans for dinner, and after sleeping until around midnight, yours truly got the bubble guts. So I figured I would hoof it to the outhouses and all would be well. Boy, was I wrong for assuming that taking a dump would be in my cards. A pack of trash pandas was blocking the path, and as soon as I got close enough to see what they were, I heard a chorus of growls. I damn near shit my pants, but I made it back to camp and waited it out until morning. I was approached from behind at 5:30 a.m., still dark, about to board the boat to go across the lake to get my truck when I heard a grunt. I thought it was a bear, so I slowly turned. Keep in mind, this is Buckhorn Lake State Park in Nessida, Wisconsin, and the cabin I was in was a rental, across from my step-uncle's property. He always said there were monkeys in the forest behind the cabins. Anyway, I slowly turned, and this thing I noticed with glowing yellow eyes, then the rest. It was a female. The skin was grayish, yellow, and she wore fur around her ankles and wrists. The breasts were hairless, and she was around 6'7" and looked to weigh 250 pounds, sort of skinny for as tall as she was. She had markings on her body. She had no clothing on her body anywhere. She had some hair, but not what everyone says a Bigfoot has. Well, my stepdad came to the door and saw her with the spear, and he had a rifle leaning against the door facing, and he shot in front of her. She slowly turned her head and had a look like bring it, when all at once the bushes behind me rattled and I turned like, now what? Here's a Xena, princess warrior from hell? Now what? As I turned to look, the female jumped, and I'm talking 12 feet up and 25 feet out, and she disappeared in midair. But as she jumped, there was the silver sparkly thing that started flashing like fireflies. But they were silverish, white looking. I finally got my sidearm, a 9mm short nose with a sight out, and my head started ringing, and whatever was in the bush was gone. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. We used to go camping all the time with different groups of friends. We had tons of different lakes and places to go. One night, there were 4 of us, 2 guys, 2 girls, all around 19 years old, 2 tents. Where we were, we have been lots of times before, as it's a great spot by a lake. That night, just before dark, we all decided to go fishing about a minute or 2 walk from our campsite. We were gone for about an hour, came back and our campsite was completely gone. Everything, tent, coolers, our stuff, everything but what we took fishing with us. There is no possible way a person could have taken it, as where we were. There's only one way in and out, and we were fishing in the entrance. We were about a 10-minute canoe ride back to our vehicles with the spotlights that were still in them. And thank God I still had my keys in my pocket, as it had a bottle opener on it low. We went back the next day and there was not a sign of any of our stuff, like nothing at all. What's crazy is there was a 40-foot cliff straight behind us, and the actual place we were camping was about 300 feet back. 300 feet. With rocks on both sides. It freaks me out thinking about it to this day, what could have possibly happened to all of it. To provide some context, this took place about a year ago, more accurately October and November 2017, near my home in Lapeer County, Michigan. For reference, I'm about an hour north of Detroit, a used to be small town that's become more densely populated over the last decade with a lot more hustle and bustle. However, where I live, I'm at least 1 mile away in all directions from any commercial zones or more modernized residential areas that tend to be a bit congested. It's one of the last stretches of slow old farm country in the town that hasn't been overrun with cookie cutter subdivision. My house was built in the 70s by my grandfather, with whom I still reside, along with my husband, daughter, and aunt. We are his caretakers while we save up and finish school to afford our own home. There's a sizable lot or 3 of land between our house and our neighbors on either side. Might be worth mentioning that growing up, my friends always said my house looked like a house you'd see in a horror film due to its setting amongst dense trees. Some of the trees have been cut down to prepare for more houses, but fortunately for us, the builders violated multiple codes, I guess. So now there's a bit of an overgrown, expansive field. Anyway, I'm rambling, just an inherently descriptive person trying to paint as detailed of a landscape as possible for anyone else who might find it helpful. So it's an autumn Sunday evening and the sun has been down for a bit. Most of the leaves had fallen by now, but I recall it being an unusually warm night for that time of year. Everyone in my house was winding down for the night and preparing for the work and school week. I'd say around 10:30, I'd decide to let my dogs out one last time before turning in for the night. I go to open our back door, which is a giant glass sliding door, wall window, and my dogs are right at my feet behind me, ready to bust out of the door as soon as it opens wide enough. I'm glad I didn't let them out, because I guarantee if they saw what I briefly did, they would have both charged toward it, and it would have just been bad. I open the door, and where the edge of our yard ends and the brushy field begins, keep in mind, this brush is a bit taller than I am. I am 5 feet tall exactly. A pale grayish figure is standing amidst the brush at the edge of the yard. The only reason I noticed it in the first place was because the noise my door made seemed to have startled it. So it made noise in the dry fallen leaves, which then caused me to direct my attention toward this noise. Which is when I saw it fleetingly duck down and take off further into the field behind my house. It's difficult to describe, but due to what I saw, being familiar with coyotes, feral cats, and other animals I'm used to seeing around the property, it had remarkably human characteristics given its height and how it crouched over, before moving in bound-like strides into the field. That's another thing I noticed, was that it didn't make the sound that a human, or any animal that is native to this area for that matter, would make in retreat. The pace wasn't quick with multiple steps like a human deer or coyote. They were like lengthy, bounding strides, and the sound it made hitting the ground had weight to it. The tread was not light, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It sounded big. It kind of took my breath away, and I was left startled myself. But due to what I did see, believing what I saw to bear resemblance to a human, I sheepishly called out, "Hello. Is someone out here?" I'm still standing in my doorway, kind of frozen in mild fear. I yell again, "Hello?" This time a bit more confident and enunciated. This captures the attention of my husband and my aunt. My husband came downstairs to see why I was yelling outside, as did my aunt. I explained to both of them, kind of frantically, what I had just witnessed. My aunt was spooked, and my husband went upstairs to get a flashlight and his air rifle. I'm an animal lover, and I don't like the idea of him shooting any animals, even problem animals with something that can do serious damage like a real gun. So he uses an air rifle, but it can still wound and kill small game, like a raccoon. My husband and I both go outside into the backyard, him with the rifle and light. We begin scanning a pitched, black overgrown field to no avail at first. Maybe after 5 minutes of looking, my husband hops on top of his sedan that's parked outside to get a better view of the field or any movement through the brush, and continues looking. His gaze stops in one particular direction, though. He hops down and quietly approaches me in the yard and points in the direction of what he is looking at. About 20 yards into the field, in the direction closer to the back of my neighbor's property, two glowing orange-red eyes are looking right at us through the brush, somewhat low to the ground. When he gets me to see what he's seeing, he decides to shoot in the general direction of this thing to maybe startle it a bit, to see how it moves. He did this several times, and it didn't flinch. Then he decided he would try to aim his fire directly at it to get a reaction, and he's a damn good shot. He hits it in, what I imagine to be the face, and it sort of jumps up, and when it landed, it was a solid-sounding thud against the ground. All the while, it did not break its gaze on us. After hitting the ground, it moved further back into the field without running away necessarily. It kept eye contact with us the entire time, almost as if it was walking backward, not once averting its gaze. It eventually moved far enough back that we both had to jump onto the car to still be able to see it. After several minutes of this, it had moved beyond our visual, so we hopped down and went inside. It's worth mentioning that there wasn't any sort of light that would cause reflective eyes aside from the moon, which wasn't even full, and it was very dark. We purposefully kept our lights off, and the eyes looked as though they weren't even reflecting light, but more so emitting it. Do with this what you will, but I and my husband both know what we saw, and given the frequency and variety of animals we see normally. Otherwise, this was significantly different than what we see. We have deer, coyotes, foxes, possums, raccoons, skunks, and feral cats, all of which we are very familiar with. We have not seen anything like this before or since this time, although we do hear strange sounds and noises in the field and the woods from time to time at night. My husband has actually woken me up in the middle of the night to listen to some strange moans and wailing, but that hasn't happened since earlier this year. I felt it was valuable to share in the sense that not all encounters are ones where whatever it is inherently malevolent or predatory, in torturous pursuit of humans. It was just an experience that struck me as particularly odd. There's this forest near my house here in southeast England that my friends and I use for mountain biking, but it's got a very uncomfortable, strange vibe to it. The only person we ever see here is the same older man walking his dog, but he always appears when we're feeling really uneasy due to the energy. He will just suddenly walk past, and you never see him coming. There is a tree that has become a memorial for a dog that died, coincidentally a German Shepherd, same breed as the man's and looks very similar. Sometimes, in the furthest corners of the woods, I distinctly hear a dog collar behind me or nearby. Here's where things get a bit strange. There's a spot we use for campfires and drinking. We were there late at night, around 9-10 p.m., but gradually began feeling creeped out as the energy started to increase. We started hearing a very strange noise. It definitely was not a fox or bird. It sounded very sweet and innocent at first until it turned into blood, curdling shrieking. We quickly packed our stuff and went on a mission to get the hell out of Dodge. There's a field that serves as the main access point to the woods. We were using the main path through it and got an overwhelming sense of dread, sadness, and almost anger mixed together. In the bushes to the side of the path, we heard running, very, very heavy running. And all of a sudden, we started hearing the most horrible growling and screaming noises getting worse and worse until we got to the exit of the field, and it all stopped. We didn't hear it run away, but all the noises and running just stopped. We all had strange dreams that night. One time, I heard very heavy running footsteps in the bushes right behind me while my friend was having a pee. I turned around to see if it was him, but there's no way it was because he hadn't moved from that spot. He came back and asked if I heard running too. 2 days ago, I went back there for the first time in around 5 months alone as I moved away from the local area. The strange feeling was still there, and in some areas it felt like it has gotten worse, but I didn't let it bother me. I went back again today, and there was heavy rainfall the last couple of days, so the ground is very muddy. I kept hearing the dog collar that follows me around, and I noticed strange hoof marks in the ground, but they were very inconsistent. Groups of them would appear, and then there wouldn't be any more until around 15-20 meters up the path. They definitely weren't there 2 days ago, and these woods take so long to get into, many people wouldn't bother going there, and it's impossible to get a horse in there. I have a few theories about this forest. I think it could be a similar presence to Goatman, as he was often linked to canine deaths. The potential cryptid activity and hoof marks are consistent with this theory. Very unlikely but plausible it could be the devil's hoof marks. The presence definitely feels demonic. The forest is potentially a dumping ground for bodies. There was a suspected murder in the local town, and police searched the woods. It would explain the strange presence, but not the cryptid activity. People with dirt bikes sometimes use the forest. One of them could have died there and haunts it. My name is Corporal Isaac Martinez, and I was part of a 5-man National Guard unit dispatched to the remote town of Elk Ridge, bordering Sequoia National Park. The call for evacuation came after the local sheriff's office was flooded with reports of a terrifying creature, a dolmen. As night cloaked the town, the beast made its presence known, its guttural growls echoing through the night. It was unlike anything we had faced before, a monstrous hybrid of man and beast. The mission had turned from evacuation to survival. We fought, not just for ourselves, but for the terrified citizens we had sworn to protect. Amidst the chaos, we started piecing together a horrifying possibility. The dogman. Could it be one of our own? One of our friends who had gone missing in these woods months ago? The reality hit us like a punch to the gut. We were not just fighting a creature. We were fighting a brother. A man who once stood by our side, now a monstrous predator. The creature was relentless. One by one, my comrades fell. I can still hear their screams, their desperate pleas for mercy, but the beast showed none. It was just me, alone and cornered, waiting for my end. But the end didn't come. The dogman, it just spared me. I don't know why. I collapsed from exhaustion, the adrenaline finally wearing off. The next day I was found by park rangers, delirious and shaken. As they helped me to my feet, one of them recoiled. "Your teeth," he stammered. I ran my tongue across my teeth, feeling the sharp points of new, abnormal fangs. The rangers and I shared a look of horrified understanding, but we knew this had to stay silent. What happened at Elk Ridge would be buried along with my fallen brothers. The world would never know the truth. I was left with a burden, a secret, and a horrifying reality. The dogman was gone, but maybe, just maybe, a part of him was now a part of me. I had an encounter 2 summers ago in the area called Kimball Bottoms, or as the locals call it, the desert. Anyway, I was down there at a drum circle they were having, and I don't know if it was the drumming that attracted this thing or what. I was facing the water and banks of the Missouri River, and it still being light outside, around 7 p.m. in the summer. I could see everything clearly. I thought I saw a heat signature on the opposite bank, like heat rising off a hot parking lot in the summer. This stood out to me as I'd been staring in that area. Anyway, zoning out as I went into an almost trance. Like state, due to the drumming, I started seeing this thing move. I stopped drumming and walked over to the edge of the bank. The more I watched, the more I realized that this heat signature looked like it had arms and legs and was like swaying to the drumming still going on behind me. My friend came up and asked what I was looking at, and as I pointed it out to her, other people from the circle started to notice that we were pointing and staring at something across the river. More people stopped drumming and joined us at the bank. Some could see what we were seeing and others couldn't. Eventually, nobody was drumming anymore, and this glimmer man had stopped swaying and was watching us watching. More than one person had mentioned that it looked like the invisible, yet visible, alien from the movie Predator. It was after maybe 3 minutes of watching this invisible being. And yes, many people tried taking pictures and video of it, only to not see anything when reviewing the images on their phones. Not surprising when you are trying to photograph a nearly invisible heat signature looking thing. At one point we could see this thing move back into the tall reeds and were surprised as the reeds parted. Those who didn't see the being couldn't help but see the reed part as it moved away. A few of us sat there for a good hour, waiting to see if this invisible being came back, but we didn't see anything. However, many people freaked themselves out by talking about where this entity could be. Was it lurking in the water, walking along the shore, hiding in the trees, etc.? I have to agree they all had viable points. It was a very surreal encounter and only deepened my beliefs on things existing in the folds of what we call reality. I was 8 years old, living with my parents outside of Memphis, Tennessee, in the late 1950s. On this day, it was a warm summer evening. My parents were next door, talking to the neighbors. All the kids were running around and playing. The neighbors had a station wagon parked in their driveway, and the tailgate was down. I wasn't watching what I was doing, and while running, I tripped and went face first into the tailgate. I split my lip all the way down from my nose through my lip. My upper lip was laid open, so I had to go to the hospital. I was terrified of needles and fighting the nurses as they tried to give me a local anesthetic before stitching me up. I was a strong little kid, so 3 nurses pinned me down, and I remember one nurse saying, "We're going to play cowboys and Indians. We're going to tie you up." They strapped me down from head to toe. They gave me the shot in my lip, sewed me up, and I went home. After that, I began experiencing night terrors. I attributed that event of getting strapped down and my lip sewed up as the nexus of the night terrors. The nightmare was always consistent. I am at my grandparents' house with all my cousins, like we always did, sleeping on a pallet on their living room floor on the old rug she had there. She'd lay a blanket down and put pillows out. I would lay there with a huge rock on my chest, and I can't move any part of my body. I can see up to the top of the rock, and over the rock pops a figure. The face is of a character in a TV series that was popular in the late 50s called Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. It is a creepy little character, a weird puppet with a snuggle tooth. The face is looking over the rock, and he's laughing at me. He's also talking to me, but I can't hear him. I know he's talking because his mouth is moving. Then I see a hand come over the top of the rock, then an arm, and then a shoulder. A figure pops its head up, and it's a figure with bony hands. This thing had a teardrop-shaped head, and it had big black almond-shaped eyes, just like the pictures you see of an alien gray. This was before anyone had ever described alien encounters or abductions. I see this thing look over the top of the rock, and it starts to come toward me. At that point, the dream stops, and I would wake up in a panic. The night terrors started to wane when I matured and became an adult. I got married, started raising a family, and I didn't have that dream for almost 50-something years. That was until this past year. One night, my wife had gone out of town. I was here at home with the dogs just working and relaxing. I'll read a book for a while, then I'll watch a TV show and go to bed. Well, that's what I did. That night, I had the same old nightmare return. I haven't had it for all those years. I wake up, but not in a night terror state. It's totally dark, no outside light coming through the windows. I started to think that I'm still asleep and dreaming. Then I see a figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom, and I see its arm up against the wall. I look at this thing, and I'm again wondering if I'm awake or if I'm dreaming. The next thing I remember, I'm walking through my house with a firearm, and I'm checking the house. The dogs are not alarmed at all and are asleep in their beds. I walk back to my bedroom, put the pistol away, and get back in the bed, and I fall asleep. It was probably the best night of sleep that I ever had. The nightmare I had experienced that night was exactly the same as I had those many years ago. Why I just had one more nightmare is a mystery, because I have had no more since then. One quick note, a few days after this experience, I was in my office working. I had the TV on. Then I heard someone mention Fran Allison, who was the woman from the Kukla, Fran, and Ollie show. I looked up, and there was the face of the ugly Ollie character from my nightmares. I didn't panic, but I quickly turned the TV off. My name is Sergeant Avery Thompson, and I led a small team of National Guard soldiers assigned to Grand Canyon National Park. Our mission was to protect park visitors from a mysterious entity wreaking havoc in the area. As we investigated, we learned of the local legend, the Crawler, a grotesque creature said to haunt the park's woods. While some of us were skeptics, others couldn't shake the fear that something sinister lurked in the shadows. Isolated in the vast wilderness, we found ourselves in a constant state of unease. Our radios crackled with static, and the thick fog that rolled in each night seemed to choke our very senses. The fear was palpable, but we had a job to do. The tension reached its peak when we finally encountered the creature. Its twisted, elongated limbs and pale, hairless body were the stuff of nightmares. We engaged the monstrosity, our training pushing us through our terror. The battle was fierce, but in the end we managed to neutralize the abomination. We carefully transported the corpse to a government biofacility, hoping that our ordeal was finally over. However, we soon realized that the truth would remain hidden. A group of stern government officials, likely Secret Service agents, ordered us to keep the incident a secret, warning us of severe consequences if we dared to speak out. The fear of the unknown was replaced by a different fear, the fear of what we had seen, and the knowledge that we could never share it. We left the park, our minds burdened with the truth about the Crawler and the secret that we were forced to carry for the rest of our lives. I lived in Iowa when I was in college. At nights after I got off work, I would take my dog, Boxer, out for a run in a local trail. It was approximately 5,000 of paved running trails going through a wooded area, and it was usually pitch black. One night, my dog, who was as calm as could be, was riles up, and he kept growling and trying to go into the woods, from the beginning of the run until the end. Throughout the run, a loud growling noise would follow me. I ignored it at first, as there were no known natural predators in Iowa at that time. However, I'm pretty sure that was the fastest 5K I ever ran. In the next few months, I heard of some mountain lion sightings in the area. Once in a while, we would hear about them, but they were so rare, it could have been someone mistaking a dog for a mountain lion. Now I see pictures of mountain lions from people back home on Facebook. I'm pretty sure a mountain lion was stalking me throughout my run, and it probably would have taken me down if it wasn't for my dog. I still remember the growling following me. It's like it was actually right next to me the entire time. Lived out on 80 acres of land in southern Colorado for a good part of my teenagehood. Parents owned the land, however, didn't do much with it as it was pretty much a desert. Flat dirt as far as you can see, with the occasional big bush, standing only about 4 or 5 feet off the ground at the highest. Totally barren. At one end of the land was a giant cliff about 80 feet tall that led down to a creek. That was the only interesting part about the land, so I would often go down there with my little brother and throw rocks, play in the water, shit like that. Well, one day him and I are fooling around by the creek when we noticed it started getting dark. We kind of freaked out because the only way back to my parents' house was either up the cliff, a very steep and pretty dangerous climb for the daytime, let alone the night, or to walk all the way around the property line to the road and follow it up. About an hour-and-a-half walk with a 10-year-old. We choose option B as the sun is setting and make our way around toward the road. By the time we get to our property gate at the beginning of my parents' driveway, a mile-long dirt road, it is already pitch black out. All we had was the little light the moon gave us. I'm not really afraid of the dark, and I have never been one to believe in all those ghost stories or anything like that, and my brother was too invested in the Milky Way and telling me facts about different stars that I really wasn't thinking anything was going to happen. Well, we get to the top of the road where we can see our parents' house, and out of nowhere, the loudest ear-piercing scream comes from somewhere right behind us. It was so loud and shrill that me and my brother dropped to the ground and covered our ears. I spun around but didn't see anything, and the air felt different, almost as if something was watching us. I frantically stood up and did a 360 turn, but all I saw was dirt and small shrubs. I grabbed my brother by the hood of his jacket and pulled him forward as I began bolting to our shed, all while feeling like something was behind us that entire time. My brother was crying and hid in the far corner of the shed as I tried to logically convince myself that it was a coyote or maybe one of the neighbor's cows. After about 30 seconds, I decided to open the shed door and peek out. And right on the horizon of where me and him were just standing on top of the driveway was this tall creature. I couldn't see much of anything except for a silhouette because of how dark it was, but it had to have been standing at least 8 feet tall, and had a very long arms that seemed to touch the ground, despite it appearing to be in an upward position. I couldn't register much else because it turned and bolted down back toward the beginning of the road. I slammed the shed door shut again, and me and my brother ended up hiding out in there all night. Told my parents, and they wrote it off as our imagination and a trick of the dark, and nothing like that has ever happened before, or up until the time when I moved away. I have no idea what it was. Maybe I was just seeing something. Maybe me and my brother were just tired and misheard and animal noise. But what I do know is that it scared the ever-living shit out of me, and I was always home, way before dark since then. In northern Idaho, deep in the Rocky Mountains, there is a cabin that runs a cattle ranch. Chris's brother knows the owner and invited Chris to spend a weekend up there for some hunting and hiking. The brothers gathered their supplies and a few of their best pals and took off to the mountains. As they were driving up the winding Idaho roads, his brother issued a cryptic warning. Sometimes the cattle escape into the woods and need to be tracked down. The owner of the ranch has seen strange creatures in the forest. I'm not messing around. Everyone laughed and didn't take the warning seriously. Within the hour, they arrived at the cabin. On the second day in the mountains, Chris decided to go on an afternoon hunt with one of his friends. They drove down a back, rode into the forest until the road ended a few miles from the cabin. They got out and walked to the nearby creek, then split off with one person going upstream and one person going downstream. After walking for a ways, Chris came to a salty deposit where he noticed a foul odor in a broken pine tree that was green and healthy. The trunk was snapped in the direction of the water. There were 4-finger indentations in the tree bark, like it had been squeezed and pulled down by a massive hand. Sap bubbled from the compressed bark. On the ground, he discovered numerous huge footprints with 5 toes stamped into the silt. He followed them and counted 73 beautiful tracks that lead to another snapped green pine tree. This tree also had big finger marks on it and was facing in the direction of the water. Tracks danced all around this tree. The smell was now overwhelming. Chris became so spooked that he immediately ran back to the truck. His friend had shot a deer, and they quickly drove back to the cabin with it. At the cabin, Chris explained the situation to everyone. That night, 6 men from the cabin armed themselves, each with a rifle and a pistol, and returned by truck to the end of the dirt road. They parked the truck facing the creek and then walked on foot to the edge of the water. It was a moonless, starry night, but the horrible smell still lingered. The band of hunters waited and at one point howled into the night, calling for the creature. Chris thought he could hear something moving in the forest, but the creek was too loud to be sure. He decided to walk alone upstream and into the woods to get a clearer sound. He could hear that there was definitely something big making its way through the pine. He ran back to the hunters and warned them that something was approaching. Moments later, from both up and downstream, they began to hear branches snapping and footsteps thudding. The sounds came from both directions, closing in on the group. The footsteps grew louder and louder until the booming crunch of a log under the surface of the mud spooked them so much that they all ran back to the truck. In less than 2 minutes, they made it back to the vehicle. The moment they fired up the truck and turned on the headlights, they could see 2 massive bipedal hairy creatures moving up the creek in the location they had just retreated from. The creatures' eyes shined from the truck's headlights. All of the men had clear shots, but all took flight back to the cabin in terror. The stench greeted them upon their return. They feared that with the slain deer outside, the creatures would be drawn to the property. They all slept curled up with their guns that night, but no more signs of the creatures would be found. I told you, little brother, I was not messing around. He figures he ran into a family of them. There was a wild look in his eyes as he turned to me and said, "I know they exist." I was camping by myself at Pansy Lake, just south of the Clackamas-Marion County line in, and had an encounter. My tent was pitched on an old access road that had grown over, but would be an easy route for wildlife. Also nearby is an abandoned copper mine cave. I noticed that creature sounds were not normal as I went to sleep. I woke up about 1 a.m. and could sense that something was nearby. I made no noise and listened intently. After a few minutes, I heard a significant branch break. I knew a sizable creature made that noise. I'm blind without my glasses, but found my mag light and panned it back and forth in the direction of the noise. After 10 or 20 seconds of this, I heard chest beating like a mountain grouse, but knew better. I kept up the panning because I did not want to show weakness. Then, I got deep lung, ape-like sounds which I cannot describe or attribute to any animal I know of. It was obviously not happy with the light. I kept up the panning, and finally the thing took off down a small canyon on the downhill side of the road and up the other side, making lots of noise going through the brush. When it got to the other side, I panned over there too and got the ape-like sounds again. I stayed up the rest of the night and nothing else happened. I'd gone on many hikes and was never scared like this. That was my last hike. A side note is, vehicles were being habitually vandalized at the trailhead at about this time. Could be humans or possibly the creature. Also, the creature was going in the direction of the abandoned copper cave. I've worked as a paramedic or firefighter for 10+ years, and I always laugh when people tell me I'm crazy for hunting in the middle of nowhere, be afraid of animals, etc. I always laugh and tell them the crap I've seen people do always worries me more than the mostly predictable behavior of animals. I have 2 stories, one hunting, one none. I'll tell the hunting as it's the thread. I live in upstate New York, and we frequently get lied to about what kind of animals are here. The local DAC has a long history of introducing predators and denying their existence until it's blatantly obvious. So this year, my dad and I are bow hunting. We meet up and are walking out just before dark. Just wanted to do an afternoon stalk hunt together like when I was a kid. I was lead in coming over a knoll that I've shot a lot of nice deer out of, including a good buck last year. Suddenly my dad, who is steps behind me, is hissing coyote. I turn and look, and I can't see anything. He then tells me, "You're looking right at it." In my mind, I'm looking for a coyote like I've seen my whole life. Scraggly, narrow face with brownish-white colors. The first thing I saw was the eyes. Wild yellow eyes connected to a black face with a huge head and almost silver mane. I grew up with German Shepherds, and this dog was easily 9,100+ pounds. Not 30-40 pounds like most of the coyotes I've encountered, but was most certainly not a house pet. We also were miles from anyone's house and on private land. I've never had an animal look at me like that before. It was not afraid and definitely was sizing me up. More predatory than I've ever had a black bear look at me. So as I was changing arrows, was not about to send a $35 iron will at it. My bow release hit my bow limb and the loud metallic clang and sent the dog running. We both stood for a moment not saying anything, and my dad goes, "You're gonna think I'm crazy," but I think that was a wolf. I finished his sentence before he could. My dad said he was watching a pine lot just to our left and saw the dog coming running out at us, stopping about 40 yards away. I never even heard the thing. It was as though it was hunting us, not just a random encounter where we crossed paths. I told a few co-workers about it, and they all said I was crazy. Then a few weeks later, my buddy sent me this picture of a guy he knows that hunts about 20 minutes from I was. DEC told him it was a coy dog. I'm not so sure about that. You guys have more experience with wolves than I do, but to me, that looks like what I saw, and that is a wolf in my book. Me and a bunch of friends went camping back in June of 2000, up past Fall Creek, Oregon. It was dusk when I saw it, and what happened was, I was standing there. It's been so long, I really don't remember what I was doing at the time. But I do know for sure I felt like someone was staring at me, and I also got this weird burning feeling of like adrenaline in my mind. Even though my tent was like 4 or 5 feet from the camp, I looked out toward the campfire. I could see everybody we were camping with right there. But I looked to the direction of where I got that feeling. I don't know how I just knew to look that way, but I did, and I seen it standing about 8 or 9 feet away. I felt this petrified feeling, and in the 3 seconds, which seemed so long, I thought run. But at the same time, I thought keep looking to make sure what you're looking at is real. Oh, it was real, I swear by it. I just went into the tent, and I didn't say anything to anybody we were camping with. I felt the crowd of about 11 people might have made fun of me or something. But later on that night, when my boyfriend C.W. came to bed, I told him, and of course he didn't believe me. My best friend was going out with C.W. brother, and at about 4 o'clock in the morning, when everybody was just starting to go to bed, my best friend and my boyfriend's brother got in a fight that woke almost everybody up. Tabby, my BF, went running away from the camp, and I got up, and so did my boyfriend, to talk to his brother. I went to find Tabby. In about 5 minutes or so, we all heard the loudest scream. Of course it was my friend that screamed. But as everybody went toward the area of where we all heard the scream, she was running toward us with the most petrified look, saying, "Oh my God." We were like, "What?" She said when she was down by the creek after her and SCW were arguing, she felt weird and she wanted to come back, so as she was climbing up the embankment. By the river, it was right there at the top, just hunched over looking at her. After she told that to everybody, I knew I believed her 'cause of what I saw everybody else. Well, a couple people didn't believe her, but I know for a fact what I saw, and I didn't even tell her until after it happened. And she came up and said what she seen, in case anyone is wondering what it is. It is Sasquatch. I never ever thought I would be saying that. I guess I had to see it for myself. But the Sasquatch I seen wasn't like Harry and the Hendersons. It had hair like an orangutan, but a little bit thicker, and wasn't as big. It seemed like it was about 6 feet. I get a feeling it was a female for some reason. I could be wrong. All I know what I seen was real. Its eyes, from what I could tell, looked dark. I never had a feeling that it was going to hurt me. I think I was just scared because I never seen anything like it. A while after that, my friend Tabby told her dad, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's the wild man of Windberry Creek." He said it like it was nothing. I know Tabby's mom used to bartend at Fall Creek Tavern, and they were around a lot of things said. Loggers would come in and our friends and talk about things. And apparently we weren't the first ones to have seen it in that area. Her mom bartended there about 25 years ago, and it was being seen then, too. Except we know it's not a wild man, it's a Sasquatch. That's just what they called it back then. So yeah, it's been being seen in that area from different people for 25 years. The first odd occurrence in this area was in the 90s. I had killed a nice 5x5 archery bull elk and had gone back up to retrieve a tree stand the next day with my sister. As we got near the remains, hide, gut pile, and mostly intact skeleton, hip bones, spine, ribs, neck bones. The tree limbs just beyond the remains swayed like something big had just gone through them. Didn't notice any sounds of animals. The next day I returned to look around that same area for bear sign on the remains. All the remains were gone. No sign of any drag marks like a bear or cougar had taken them. Why would a person or persons take a rotting hide, gut pile, and skeleton with no salvageable meat? A couple years later, my friend and I were hiking down after archery hunting that same spot I got that 5x5 earlier. It was just a few minutes before we had to use our flashlights to see. Off to our west, we heard something coming towards us in the trees. Heavy steps, limbs popping, and tree branches moving. We both stopped and readied our bows. When the thing came within about 15 feet of the creek bed we were walking in, it stopped. The trees were very thick in this area, and it was getting dark fast. My friend and I looked at each other kind of with a spooked feeling passing between us, and then the thing turned around and left the way it came. No sound at all other than steps and the tree limb sounds. We agreed the thing that was making the limbs move had to be 7-8 foot tall to move the limbs like it did. In August of 2000, I was archery hunting on a windy, cold day. I heard something approaching up the ridge. It sounded like a person walking very heavily. It was not an elk or deer. A few minutes later, there was a very loud roaring sound from roughly 200 yards away. I thought it was someone mad that I was hunting there, but the volume was just too loud for a human. About 2 minutes later, there was a second roar, and it had moved about twice the distance away from me. That roar was followed by an elk bugling 100 yards away. I didn't look for any sign, as the roars actually spooked me some, and I didn't want to find anything that could produce that kind of a sound with that volume. In early 2001, I had hiked up the southeast side of the mountain, following a small creek up, exploring a side of the mountain I had never been on. I got up to the upper levels of the tree line and started around to the east side to hike the big ridge running off the east side of the mountain. There was still some snow around the clearings and in the trees. In one of the clearings, I noticed a strange, large impression near the middle. This clearing was maybe 80 feet across with bare dirt except for snow around all the edges under the trees, steep sloping ground. I stood beside the impression and just stared at it. The print was going in the same direction as I was. The uphill side was very visible and the downhill side was gone. It was very easy to distinguish the toes and the heel and the outline of the print on the uphill side. It was a right foot print, and the bigger toe and the 4 smaller toes were there. Smallest toe was barely seen, as downhill side left no impression of outside of foot. You could see the curve around the heel, but not quite all of the curve. Step on a steep slope sometime and see how much of your print is visible while keeping the bottom of your foot flat, as if walking on level ground. The track was 16-18 inches long and about 7-8 inches wide. I dismissed it as a freak natural occurrence, as there was only the one. When I started off the mountain late in the day, I realized that the weathering, the track had shown plus with the warmer weather, and the snow melt, it might have been possible for the snow to have been gone in the middle of the clearing, and for the snow to melt faster outwards from the clearing as it would get more sunlight than the edges. I had looked around for signs of other people having gone up there before me, but saw none. Not even on the trails at the base of the mountain did I see any sign other than my own. In June or July of 2001, my ex-wife and I were setting up our camp for the evening. It was dark, as we had got a late start after work. We were putting up our tent with only one lantern burning, when we both, at the exact same time, looked up at each other and asked if the other had farted. We both had smelled a really strong odor. Made me think of a bear scent, but it had an odd sweaty smell. Never had smelled a bear with that type of odor. I grabbed my flashlight, which I discovered had a nearly dead battery, and walked into the direction of the wind. I could still smell the strong odor, so about 30 yards from my truck, I started looking as best as I could for any eye shine. I swung the flashlight beam, aiming it more towards the ground level, expecting to see some eyes at a lower than hip level. I instead saw a pair of yellowish eyes higher up than expected. I raised the flashlight and I saw a dark form like a shadow standing there 30-40 feet away. The ground in that direction starts to slope down to a dry creek bed. I am 6'4", and with the slight slope, the shadow was taller than me. When the light hit the shadow, I saw the eyes either squint or in some way react to the light being shined directly on it. After 4 or 5 seconds, it turned and disappeared. I could see an outline, like a shadow, of very wide shoulders and arms that hung down like a person's. If this had been a person, The eyes would toad in a yellowish color, nor would they have reacted to the light. This shadow, as it turned, was perfectly silent and just disappeared into the woods. The shadow appeared to be 7-8 feet tall, considering the slight downhill flow of the terrain and that I had to look up slightly at the eyes. I listened for a few hours that night after going to bed and heard nothing odd. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you tomorrow, son.